Daniel Vallis here. Thank you for all those who continue to pray for this ministry, and me especially. I do greatly appreciate your kind comments and your prayers, especially. I need strength and wisdom at this time, and especially strength. I am extremely tired, but we are watching, and we are burning the midnight oil right now. And it is so exciting to see the wisdom that the Lord has given us and how He has drawn us to this time. So the more we continue to go forward in faith and look and watch and dig into God's Word and explore why we've been brought to this time, the more wisdom and insight God will give us. So we are on an amazing journey right now, so we must continue watching and act on faith on what the Lord has shown us. When we don't understand one thing, we don't throw away everything else. We rest on what we have been shown, and we go forward in faith from there. In our last video, we talked about the concept that constellations are not lines connecting different dots. And we really need to keep that in mind. And the more I'm studying and looking at it, I'm definitely a whole lot more convinced solidly that constellations, we need to think of them not as lines connecting dots, but we need to think of them as the concepts. And even when you look at the definitions of constellation and what a constellation generally is, a constellation is a grouping of stars. So a constellation is not lines. It is the concept of what is seen in that grouping of stars. And it is a grouping of stars. So we do need to fix our thinking right now, especially with this modern age, very technical. We are used to looking at constellations as lines, like the Big Dipper and Orion, things we've been taught growing up. But from a more ancient perspective, the concept that they represented objects and concepts. So we need to back out a little bit and make sure we're not limiting ourselves when we approach prophecy, especially when it deals with concepts and objects depicted in the stars, not limiting ourselves to a technical delineation of where those stars are necessarily and being super precise on right next to each other and which side, but backing off a little bit and viewing it as a grouping of stars. It literally is a grouping of stars, and there are a lot of stars there. So when we consider that it is a grouping of stars, particularly Leo here that we're talking about, and when the Bible does talk about the scepter being between the feet, when we back off from thinking of it in terms of lines and realize, okay, is he more talking about, and it appears so, that he's talking about being between the feet of, in that area of the feet, between those stars that make up the feet, that area. He will not depart from that region. Our attention will be drawn to it, especially while the scepter is in Judah as a whole, but specifically also while it is at the hind feet. And our attention has definitely been drawn to that, especially over the past few hours too as well. So we find ourselves right now with Jupiter and the scepter in the region of the stars, of the concept of the Leo lion. And if you look at a lot of older artwork about the constellations going way back, you won't find them hardly, very rarely, depicted with the lines. The overwhelming majority is it is a representation of a grouping of stars. Not a connect the dot art. No, it is a collection of a grouping of stars. And so I updated the constellation of Leo with the most recognized stars that go with that constellation, with that grouping. And I just outlined the major form so that we can recognize it somewhat. But all the other stars have been long recognized for centuries and thousands of years as being with, grouped together with, the concept of Leo the lion. And so it is not necessarily a stick figure. It is a grouping. It is a blobby shape, I guess you would say. But it does have the distinct regions still. It does have the distinct regions of the tail and the legs and the head. And so when the Bible prophecy talks about being between the feet, that still references a very specific area. And when we compare it with an overlay of the path that we've seen this year that is unique to this year, and we've talked a lot about that already and won't happen again in the next 12 years either, it's very interesting that this year, when we are expecting it in the last generation year, that there's practically a circle drawn around the area of the hind leg in the grouping of the stars of the constellation Leo. Now, just so we don't get our mind wrapped around my artwork that I have with that, we need to fuzzy it a little bit and just kind of look at the regions of if we really made the lines, connecting them thick and fat and put some meat on them. We have a fairly well-defined region that we know we're talking about between the feet. And just with the orbit path and the constellation, if we add in the additional stars of the lower foot there, that does still place it well within the foot, definitely. So we're still there, even from a astronomical point of view, a visual point of view, a conceptual point of view. So don't give up. We are learning so much right now. It is most definitely still between the feet, among the stars that make up the hind feet. So I just wanted to let you know that I updated the Sign of Shiloh sheet with this new information. So definitely check it out. We have a link in the description box directly to this new one. The only change I made on the front page is mentioning that the 13th, 14th, right around there is when Jupiter is now at the hind leg. And then to see page 3 because I added another page. There is no additions on the second page. And again, a reminder that we see this sign right in the year of the last generation. So we know so many signs are calling our attention to the right now. And we are exploring more, and Lord willing, in our next video or so, I'll talk more about the relevance of the 9th of Av and going forward from that and how it carries along still. But I'll give you a little teaser right now. The 9th of Av was when the 10 spies brought the evil report about the promised land. But Joshua and Caleb were encouraging them, let's go forward. Let's go in and take what the Lord has promised us. They wanted to embrace the promises. If the people had obeyed and listened and embraced the promises, the next few days after the 9th of Av, they would have been entering the promised land. Something for us to think about in the days ahead. Powerful picture right now. We have so much drawing our attention to this time. We must continue to watch. But I added a third page with this artwork so you could explore it now. Lord willing, we'll talk about it more in the future and get more detailed and granular on it. But get your thinking wrapped around thinking of Leo as a concept and how there are additional stars, and we do need to take that into concept. And even when we just take them into consideration, it is still definitely within the line, almost you could say, of even the hind leg stars too as well. So that's the third page. And then on the fourth page, I added our covering of the twofold prophecy of Genesis 49:10. And we need to keep in mind, Jacob specifically told them, verse 1 of chapter 49, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Jacob plainly told them, this is a blessing. It's going to have an immediate application, but it's going to have a second application in the last days. Is when some of this is going to be fulfilled. And we talked about this in our video, Embracing the Promises. We did the breakdown of that. But this gives you a good reference of how it's been fulfilled, different parts of it already in the first application and second application. And then how we're awaiting the second fulfillment of the second part, the redemption of the purchased possession, when Christ will gather physically what he has already gathered spiritually through the obedience of those who put their faith and trust in him. Then, of course, the million-dollar question, how long? Down at the bottom is a countdown. There's about 28 days, I believe, still between where we are right now when we could say, okay, it's definitely on the leftward side of the hind leg star near the ecliptic, the hind leg there. So from now on, it's going to be moving away from the star cluster that forms the hind leg. So obviously, the closer we are to that, the stronger it is. And that's where we find ourselves right now. But the further we go along, it's going to get weaker and weaker for someone to make a strong case that, yes, we're near the hind leg. So I can't put a specific number of days, but I will say it's not that many because we will start to be moving away from the cluster real soon. And Lord willing, we'll get more detailed on that in our next videos. So definitely download this sheet, study it, and get your mind wrapped around this concept. Build your faith on what the Lord has shown you. Review our other materials, the Exodus 2 materials as well. We are still right in the middle of this prophecy being fulfilled. Our attention has been drawn to it. It is still ongoing, and the Lord is trying to catch our attention. So we will lift up our heads, for our redemption is drawing nigh, and he is giving wisdom and insight and strength and grace because he wants to draw us close to him with our heart and life now before he gathers his people, so we will meet him halfway. Serve Christ first and highest above all else. Maranatha.